In this episode, we're meeting with Max Clifford, CEO of Max Clifford Associates and publicist to the stars. Max, if there's one way to describe your career, that would be fascinating, and you're obviously one of the most prominent people here in the UK as well as around the world. And there seems to be a cloud of mystery around exactly what you do, and if you'd love to explain that, that'd be great.
Well, I mean, the basis of my business, which is public relations, is creating the right image, the image which is going to be most beneficial to your client. And my clients go from being stars to being very famous people to being companies, organisations, countries. So there's a wide range there, but it's all about promotion and protection. Trying to do as much as you can to understand the needs of every individual client, and they're all different, and working with the media to get as much positive media coverage and stop as much damaging media coverage.
Can you please give me a case study of promotion and then one of protection also?
Well, I'll give you an idea. There's a very well-known jeweller in this country called Gerald Ratner, and many years before, he wasn't a client of mine at the time, he made a off-the-cuff statement at a Belvedere dinner where he described his jewellery as rubbish, or words to that effect. That was picked up by the media. He tried to defend himself by all kinds of ways, I think saying that it was taken out of context, but obviously it was something that the media picked up on, and there was a huge amount of publicity, and that publicity destroyed his business. He had a very successful business all over the country. Now, he spent years trying to turn that around and couldn't, but he eventually came to me and said, "Can you help?" He was about then to launch an online jewellery business called Gerald Online. So I said to him, "Well, there's no point in you blaming the media for you putting your foot in it, because they're not going to write that. But if you want to stand up and say, it was your fault, you made a fool of yourself, you did this, you did that, then they'll all write about it, and at the same time they'll write about your new company," which is what happened. And the business became a huge success, and in fact within a few months, there was a lot more to it than that, but within a few months he was making even more money from his online jewellery business than he had when he had shops all over the place, jewellery shops. So it's a practical example of how, if you understand how the media works, you've got a reasonably good chance of turning a disaster into a triumph. That's what happened with him.
And protection?
I think protection, really, the most important part of protection is anticipation. When clients come to me, whether they're famous film actors or TV stars, pop stars or business people, I basically say to them, if I don't know more about you than anybody else, I can't protect you. I need to know as much as possible. The more I know, the more chance I've got of protecting you from the excesses of the media and your own excesses, which of course everybody has. So, and I think fortunately for me, people I've worked with over the last 40 odd years, people I've protected and secrets I've kept are still secret to this day. So the lawyers for those people, or the managers for those people, or someone close to those, but are happy to recommend me when someone else becomes in that situation.
Can you give us a case study of protection?
Well, I suppose a light-hearted example would be Freddie Star and the hamster story,
yes,
which happened a long time ago, nearly 20 years ago now, but people still remember it. Basically, I found out that someone was going to the Sun newspaper with a story about Freddie Star eating their hamster. Now, Freddie wanted me to try and stop it. He saw it as being very damaging to his career, because people in Britain are animal mad, even rodent mad. So, but my view was this is going to be good publicity for Freddie, based on the kind of act he has and the kind of person he is. And my view was that most of his fans can't read or write anyway, so they won't worry too much whatever happens. So I worked with Kelvin Mackenzie, who was then editor of The Sun, and basically said, look, you run with the story, we won't sue you, we won't, as long as you put very clearly that Freddie denies eating a hamster. And then the following day, as part of that protection, after the initial headline, we then took a Sun photographer and journalist to Freddie's home, did a photo of him with a hamster on his shoulder, which we said was his pet hamster, which we called Sandwich. And, you know, if you like, the whole nation laughed at it. He was about to do a theatre tour, and bear in mind this headline was meant to have been damaging to him. The theatre tour was sold out. They added 100 dates. He worked off the back of the hamster story for the next few years, and it made him millions of pounds. So that's a light-hearted example of turning again something which is potentially meant to be very damaging to his career, which is what the girl wanted.
And transforming the fortunes of your client.
And, you know, turning it into a huge triumph for him.
So today, if I was the average punter on the street picking up a copy of Hello or OK magazine or one of the tabloids, how much of those stories should I actually believe in?
Well, I think everything's different. I mean, I think that particularly with magazines, the girly magazines, the gossip pages in the tabloid press, it's full of infotainment,
right,
rather than news. And sometimes, you know, it's totally right. Sometimes there's very little truth in it at all, and sometimes it's somewhere in between. But there's plenty of things appearing in papers virtually every day, particularly when it comes to light entertainment, show business, music, etc., which has got absolutely no basis in reality at all. That's the kind of part of the mix that has worked, particularly for the girly magazines and, you know, for the tabloids that are looking to attract younger viewers, younger readers all the time, because circulations of newspapers are falling.
So is there a radar, for example, that consumers can have and pick up on to say, okay, this story is true, this story is false, this story was probably seeded in by a publicity agency, or how do we, as the average people on the street, know what's true and what's not?
With great difficulty. You know, that's the fact that, I think that you just have to look at things with caution. But I think that really when it comes down to the British public, most people believe what they want to believe.
Yep.
Well, if it's light relief and if it's entertainment and you know, movies and pop music, well, often there's not a lot of depth or consequence to it. Where it becomes a problem is when you get massive stories about maybe individuals that are caught up in something that's happened, and you know, they can be very, very damaging to British media when there's absolutely no substance for them to be. You know, many a time members of the public have come to me because they're being attacked by the British press for things they've had nothing to do with. Robert Murat was a good example, who was accused of being involved with the disappearance of Madeleine McCann years ago, and was subsequently shown to have absolutely nothing to do with it in any shape or form. But after the Portuguese police gave him the Algrido status, the British media took that as a licence to write anything they want, and all kinds of terrible accusations appeared as fact with absolutely no substance at all. He came to me in an absolute dreadful state, as did his mother and his aunt, saying their lives were being destroyed by what was going in the British media. And we managed to show that there was no truth in it at all, with lawyers as well involved, and get him apologies in all the newspapers and hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of compensation. But, you know, that's an example of the excesses of the media, where, you know, they can be just so incredibly destructive. And, you know, more and more that is the case, I think, in Britain, because bad news is news, good news isn't.
Can you please explain to me the concept of helping and hurting, and if it is a win-lose situation, or if everybody can really gain out of the truth coming out in the public eye?
Well, don't forget, people have got different versions of what is the truth. You know, you go to a football match and you'll get 60,000 different accounts of what happened in front of them.
True.
But I think it really comes down to that you must have a free press, you must have an accountable press, you must have a press complaints commission that is independent and able to control the excesses of the media. But obviously journalists have an important role in revealing what's going on, particularly when it comes to powerful people and the very rich and powerful people, politicians, etc. Because in a democracy you must have a free press, but you know, a press that obviously does everything to make sure that what they come out with is the truth and just not, you know, something that sells papers.
What do you feel is your strongest case study where you've transformed a lie or an enormous falsehood in British society?
Well, I think Robert Murat,
political or otherwise.
Robert Murat would be a good example of someone who was being absolutely hounded by the British media. I suppose to a degree O.J Simpson, when he was accused of murdering his wife. He's someone I'd worked with for many years when he was the biggest star in American football, and I knew him, and I totally believed him to be innocent of that, and was able to play a part in getting a tape of the arresting officer Furman to O.J.'s defence attorney, Johnny Cochran, which basically said, the only good nigger is a dead nigger, and if we don't find evidence, we plant it, which probably won him that case. So at the time, that was receiving massive worldwide coverage for weeks and weeks and weeks.
So Max, if I had a limitless pocket right now, I knew I was guilty, and by our conversations, and you know, you're a highly intuitive person. You go through with, you know, you go with your instinct, and you knew I was guilty. What would you do in that case?
Well, I wouldn't defend you. You know, I mean, that's obviously the difference between myself and a lawyer. Although, you know, you must have, obviously, in law, someone prosecuting and someone defending. But if someone comes to me, if O.J. had come to me and asked me to look after him and help him, and I believed him to be guilty, I wouldn't have done. So, you know, it's something that I make my own opinion on based on, obviously, all the information I have and all the checks I do, and on my own instinct as well, and sometimes on my past experience of that individual.
Any regrets? Any people that you may have defended before or worked for before that have, through time, proven otherwise?
No, I mean, you know, am I saying that everything I've done has been perfect? Of course it isn't. Of course it hasn't been. But, you know, even situations that I've acted on at the time, you know, my actions were governed by what was actually going on. For example, you know, when the boys accused of being involved with the murder of Stephen Norris came to me, you know, the point I made was not that they're innocent, but that, you know, the press have found them guilty and they've not had a trial, which is wrong in a democracy. The same when parents of detainees in Guantanamo Bay came to me, and I said, this isn't right. They've not had a trial, you know, they've not been found guilty of anything at all, no one is defending them, they're being incarcerated for a long period of time, tortured. In a democracy, that can't be right. And of course, subsequently, not one of them was shown to have had anything to do with anything with regard to terrorism. So I think you take every situation on its own merits, and you know, you do the best you can with what you know, which is why I always say, if someone comes to me and you know, they're in the middle of a major drama, if I don't know more about this than anyone else, you're wasting your money and my time. And you know, and if you're giving me wrong information, I'm going to make it worse rather than better. And most of the time it works very well.
You are the go-to guy for some of the world's most prominent names. You've worked with, well, you work with Simon Cowell, you've worked with the Beatles, you've also worked with Muhammad Ali as well as Frank Sinatra. Are there any people you would never work for?
Yeah, there's lots of people that have approached me that I've turned down. Because I didn't like them, or because, you know, I was working with someone who would have been a competitor. For example, I did a lot of work with Chelsea Football Club. Well, I couldn't have taken on another football club, even though I'm an Arsenal fan, because there's a conflict of interest. But normally it's a combination, if you don't like someone, or you don't believe them, or you don't like what it is they're trying to achieve. I don't like arrogance, and a lot of people that are very rich and successful are extremely arrogant. So I won't represent them purely because of that. I'm very lucky. It's a small business. It's been a very successful business for 40 odd years. I've never ever pitched for business, but then I don't have contracts with anybody. My whole business has been a handshake. So you have to trust, know, feel, and by and large it's worked incredibly well for a long, long time.
What keeps you grounded, Max? Because you live and work with all these celebrities and powerful people, but you are very grounded in the way you approach life and the way you approach.
I think that's really your upbringing. My parents brought you up to believe you're as good as anybody else and no better than anybody else. And I think that largely you're kind of guided by that. But also I spend a lot of my time involved with terminally ill children because of children's hospices. I'm patron for in this country, and lots of other causes like that. And I think when you see what a lot of people are up against and the kind of dreadful situations that people have to face up to, you kind of count your blessings and you think how lucky you are to be where you are. Plus I think that most of the very famous people, the big stars I've worked with, don't tend to be very happy people because the only person that they're interested in is themselves. So that's a great lesson as well, not to take yourself too seriously.
And what do you advise your clients out there? Because they pick up the papers or they go online and they read all these, as many as there are fans around the world, there are also what they call the haters that criticize, that pass all these judgments that leave really bad footprints. What do you tell them?
I think everyone's different. If someone's attacked in the papers, in the media, then you look at it and think, well, that's justified, or it isn't. Mm-hmm. But I think also you understand, particularly in Britain, there's an awful lot of jealous people who don't like success and hate to see people achieving success. I remember a very famous former national hunt jockey who turned author, Dick Francis, telling me on a plane when we were going to America many years ago, I obviously a very, very rich and successful man, mainly because of his books. But he said, if I'm driving my Rolls Royce, people, cut you up and, and the things you get called. And he said, I broke every bone in my body when I was a national hunt jockey. It was a very, very, very hard sport. Getting up at whatever time and living on a lettuce leaf literally, every day and whatever to keep your weight down. But that's just how it is. And I think you just have to see it for that. In America, I've found, and other countries, people tend to enjoy other people's success far more. But there are a certain section in this country, and I think the media in many ways makes it worse because, as I've said, bad news is news, it sells. So you tend to read bad things about nasty things, sensational things, rather than the good things, which is in some ways quite sad.
And what do you think of that term, all news is good news?
The term is all publicity is good publicity. Mm-hmm. No, all publicity is not good publicity. I've known people whose lives have been ruined by bad publicity. I've known people who have killed themselves because of bad publicity. I know people whose businesses have been destroyed because of bad. Gerald Ratner, which I mentioned to you earlier, was a good example. Destroyed by publicity. So it's totally wrong. And I think the more time you spend in the middle of the media business, the more you know that.
What's the technical difference between PR as well as publicity?
A publicist basically is someone who promotes people. A PR person is someone who promotes and protects. There's a lot more to it than that. But, in my role, with most of the people I represent, I spend more time protecting them, their image, their coverage, than I do promoting them. So that's the main difference between a PR and a publicist.
Can we take a step back to the young Max Clifford, 1962 at EMI, the Beatles?
Mm-hmm. Well, I was 19, it was 1962, the music boom was just starting in Britain. No one had heard of public relations. I'd been on the local papers as a local journalist, local reporter, a trainee, started a record column, was headhunted by EMI in 1962, a guy called Sid Gillingham, and joined the press office, and within no time at all was given an unknown band to help launch called the Beatles, which for me was wonderful, but for most of the senior people at EMI was not something that was causing too much excitement. In fact, the marketing director of EMI, a very senior figure, who would have been probably in his 40s then, took myself and my colleagues to one side and said, don't waste too much time on this lot because they've got no chance. Of course, a year later they were already conquering the world. So I was just incredibly fortunate to be at the right time and the right place. You know, my part in their success was non-existent, but they were tremendously beneficial to me. And then, of course, a few years later, we launched Tamla Motown in this country at EMI. We were still just press officers. There was still no public relations business in this country. But we launched the Jackson 5 and the Four Tops, Temptations, Diana Ross, Marvin Gaye, Stevie Wonder, all of these people. So incredibly lucky to be there right at the beginning. So then when I went out on my own, when I was about 27, you know, some years later, I was already established in the industry.
But okay, is this British humility when you talk about, well, it's all Simon Cowell's talent or it's all the Beatles' talent, and I didn't really have a role in that, and it was just all luck? I mean, you had an enormous role.
No, I don't.
Well, yeah, you have an enormous role in people's...
I think in the early days, absolutely, I just was at the right time and the right place, and I was learning it as I went along, really. There was no one to teach you, so you made it up as you went along, and a lot of people would say I've done that ever since. But I do think that, you know, if you're lucky enough to get the opportunities and the openings, you then have to work on it, and you have to deliver. So, particularly in the early stages, incredibly fortunate, incredibly lucky. But as the time went by, the months and years, you know, you're able to put more and more back in, and your contribution to anybody's success therefore increases.
Let's talk about the communications industry as a whole, Max. You've got advertising there, you've got PR, promotions, publicity, and let's even step into the world of politics also. And you know, a lot of the general public, there's perception that there's a lot of lies happening in all of these industries where this is happening. However, the perception of this is being built around that. And you know, how do you, as somebody who looks after a lot of the biggest talent, manage that from an ethical standpoint?
Well, I think, you know, the fact of the matter is that everybody's got their own agenda. You know, papers have got their own agenda. I mean, if you take politics, you know, if you're a Labour person, you're not going to get much coverage, positive coverage in the Daily Mail or the Daily Telegraph. If you're David Cameron, you won't expect to get too easy a ride in the Daily Mirror. Fact of life. From a PR perspective, you're in the middle of a multitude of things. It's just a question of doing the best you can in every situation and every circumstance, and they're all very different. But I think that, you know, understanding, experience and reality, so that if someone comes to you and they're looking to do this, you say, well, look, that's not going to happen. There's no way that that audience are going to be fans of yours, because what you stand for is totally, the best we can do is to try to get your side across, or the best. So I think that, you know, you try to have a very straight, honest relationship with. It's the same with the media. You know, that plenty of times I'm trying to stop things the media want to come out with. I'm not going to lie to them. I'm not going to say, no, that didn't happen. I'm going to say, look, I understand. I'll do the best I can to stop it. So you're in opposition, but next week you're working on something together. And I think over a period of years and years and years, you build up a mutual respect, because you understand that, you know, sometimes you're going to be on the same side, sometimes you're going to be in opposition. So, you know, every day changes, every week changes, but you do your best. I think I've always done my best to treat people the way I want to be treated.
Yep. We all have this perception of Max Clifford being jet-setting and, you know, meeting important people and doing important things in the world. I wanted to find out what you felt your most important contribution was.
I think the fact of the matter is I'm very lucky. I have a wonderful business where I can, you know, the benefits have been vast for myself, my family, but I also like to think I'm able to put a lot back, you know, with all the children's hospices and all the causes that I'm involved with and generally involved, and raise awareness and funding, etc. So, but whilst, you know, I'm invited to all kinds of wonderful things, I don't go very often, and my friends tend to be people that have got nothing to do with the business at all, and they're the people that I spend most of my time with. I still swim every day. I play tennis a couple of times a week. You know, I live in a beautiful part of Surrey. I have a lovely cottage, my wife and I, down in the Cotswolds, a place called Broadway, and a beautiful place in Spain in the hills above Port de Banús. So I've been very, very lucky. I work hard. I love what I do. It's interesting. It's challenging. But I like to think that, you know, I've certainly got an awful lot out in terms of lifestyle and everything else, but, you know, I hope and believe I put a lot back as well for the benefit of a lot of other people.
Because I know you do a lot of work for the Royal Marsden, as well as, you know, there's always a great concept that you talk about very frequently, and that's the people that matter. Who are the people that matter to Max Clifford?
Well, I think it's the people that come into your life, the people that you meet, people that are up against it. You know, the families that, you know, I've got to know over many, many years of children that are terminally ill, people that suddenly are being hounded by the media when they don't deserve it. Ordinary people. People that, you know, I mean, someone called me yesterday, they've got to raise £50,000 for their little girl to have an operation so that hopefully she can start to walk. It can only be done in America. So I'll get involved with helping them. You know, last night I was at the Albert Hall World Hunger charity, which Dion Warwick put on, etc. Tomorrow night I have another charity do, and Thursday night. So the people that matter are people, you know, that maybe for all kinds of reasons are having real problems, as well as, you know, your loved ones, you know, your family, my wife, my daughter, close friends, you know, people you meet. I'm a very personable person. I like to meet and say hello to everybody. I mean, Jo, my wife, always jokes that when we leave a cafe, you know, she's waiting for me in the car for 20 minutes because, you know, I'm talking to everybody on the way out, etc. And that's how I am. That's how my brother is. So I'm a very lucky man. I'm a very fortunate man. You know, I mean, I've had my nemesis. You know, was diagnosed with prostate cancer a few years ago, fortunately very early, and it was sorted. My wife died of cancer, my first wife Liz, 8-9 years ago, very suddenly. So, you know, everybody has their dramas, disasters, tragedies, but I think, you know, it's often how you cope with them that makes you the person you are.
Max Clifford Associates and the brand that you've built, obviously it's you know, it's been an upward trajectory, possibly some downs also along the way. What do you see the future being for the brand?
Oh, I mean, listen, I'm 69 now. You know, most people think I should have retired a long time ago, especially my competitors. But as for the future, who knows? I mean, you know, I just intend to get away with it for as long as I can because it's always been working for a living. But I think, you know, I've been very lucky, as I say, mainly because of coming along when I did at the right time, the right place. Left school at 15, no qualifications, etc. So, you know, I don't really think too much about next year. I concentrate on making this week as good as possible, and then next week, and so on and so forth. So if suddenly something happens, you've got to think, well, you made the most of every minute while you were there. That's it, really.
What's the greatest lesson from Max Clifford?
Oh, I mean, I don't pretend to be any kind of profound philosopher about, you know, I suppose it's really something my mum always said as a boy, which was, you know, treat people the way you like to be treated yourself. And, you know, if you're lucky enough to get an awful lot out of life, as I do, then put a lot back.
Great. Max Clifford, thank you so much for your time today.
That's a pleasure.
Truly appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay.